Over the years, I don't think I've been subtle about what my favorite video is on my channel. It's the one I've plugged the most, and also my first video, my video on the Mass Effect trilogy. No, it's not because I'm nostalgic about how things were. It was awful. I'm simply proud of the content of that video because I believe in it. And it's worth noting that not everyone agrees with me, that my take on these games is as amazing as I think it is. And it makes sense for why some people can't appreciate my interpretation.
Rudimentary creatures of blood and flesh, you touch my mind, fumbling in ignorance, incapable of understanding.
And while I'm proud of the video, and it still holds a lot of emotional value for me, it's, well, a mess. It was a video I made by using Fraps to record it, back before there were actually good recording solutions, and I infamously recorded what was 720p footage in 1080p, while using audio that couldn't be heard. For now, let's take a look at what can be learned from the very central theme of the creation of the gift. Because I set the levels using a mic that didn't have an interface, and I duct taped it all together with an outdated version of Adobe Premiere. This is all to say that I had no idea what I was doing, and I've wanted to remake that video for almost as long as it's been out. And that's why I was so excited about Mass Effect Legendary Edition. It means I can atone for some of the early sins I made as a creator, who never expected to have 56 subscribers, much less 56,000. So I figured I'm going to do this one right. I'll make this my first 4K video to contrast my original quality, and I'll use Audible audio. And that's what I set out to do, but replaying it now that I'm older, with a better understanding of storytelling and literary criticism, I gained a new appreciation for the trilogy. So, as it turns out, having an opportunity to revisit this game doesn't only mean I have a chance to improve the technical quality of the video. It turns out I have a lot more to say about this game, since my original video. Some might consider this my final cut, but instead of an impotent montage of concept art over clumsy narration, my final cut is going to contribute to the overall substance of the discussion. Because what I learned from playing it in my research this time around is the Mass Effect trilogy isn't just a story about the Book of Revelation being the setting for an epic battle to play out Nietzsche's story about the death of God. It's in fact an existentialist myth. Let's start with the premise of Mass Effect 3.
Christian eschatology. A video game.
Hey, you got your
Christian eschatology in my video game.
what? Delicious.
Because Mass Effect 3 is a retelling of Christian eschatological predictions about the end of days. And these aren't just my words. The game uses this exact language.
If this ain't the end of days, it's pretty damn close.
And when we look at the Book of Revelation, we see just how much Mass Effect seems to use it as a blueprint. The only difference being, God doesn't win the battle over Earth in Mass Effect's telling of these events. We can see this in the events that set the stage for the fight to end all fights in the Bible. For the Book of Revelation predicts that there will be a war between heaven and earth. But it doesn't just depict a war between God and Satan. It depicts a war between God and a confederacy of nations that refuse to accept God's rule. This is, of course, the well-known character from the Bible called the seven-headed beast that comes from the sea. This beast is described in Revelation 13:1 as having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. And as Revelation 13:7 says, "And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation." In other words, the 7-headed beast resembles the world's combined power. This is why each head wears a crown atop its horns. Each head is a sovereign nation, pooling its resources to join the battle against God. Like Revelation says, this includes every tribe, people, language, and nation, meaning it's not just the beast involved in this war. It's all of those who join this war under these nations to fight God. And this can be seen in Mass Effect, because for each of the heads of the beast, there is a nation that pools its resources together to fight the Reapers, only it comes in the form of the different alien races from the game. These are the humans, Krogan, Asari, Turians, Quarians, Solarians, and the Geth. One nation for each of the 7 heads of the beast. Of course, I'm not going to disregard there are many more races in the Mass Effect universe, but what's important about these 7 races is they have the most substantial military might in the galaxy. This is why in the 3rd game, the critical path has players travel to the 6 respective planets of these 7 races. Attempting to unite the power of these races in specific is essential to winning the battle because, just as Revelation says, they were given the ability to make war with the Saints and to overcome them. And as we learned from Javik, this is something that makes our cycle unique compared to his, for there were other aliens to fight the Reapers during his cycle, but they were conquered by a single nation. That was the Protheans.
We were one empire composed of many subjects. All eventually called themselves Prothean.
What if they didn't want to?
They weren't given a choice. I have been listening to the Krogan speak to his men. In our cycle, the races never came together. There was no rallying cry. The future is still out there. It is something my people could never say. There will be a tomorrow.
Only if we win today.
No one else has ever made it this far.
Which is all to say, this concentrated effort across multiple races is what makes our cycle special. Like Javik says, no one has made it this far, and like the Bible says, this unification of 7 nations has the power to make war with the Saints. Now, what's interesting about the beast is how it's described in Revelation 13:3, where it says one of the heads of the beast seemed to have a mortal wound, but the mortal wound had been healed. And we see this same occurrence in Mass Effect in the symbol for the beast as well. For the Krogan suffer what would be considered a mortal wound because they were inflicted with the genophage. This genetic mutation that causes infertility in the species means they are facing extinction.
Do you honestly believe curing the genophage will end in lasting peace?
We have to give the Krogan that chance. You can't condemn an entire race to extinction based on what might happen.
But in the third game, players go to Tuchanka to cure the genophage, and while players have a choice on whether or not to cure the genophage or just give the impression they have done so, once players finish the mission, there is still the appearance that the beast has been healed of its mortal wound. And the appearance really is what's important. After all, this is a feat that's performed not for the beast itself, but for its followers. For Revelation 13:3 continues, the whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. Meaning this has less to do with the beast actually being healed and more to do with the fact the beast is able to galvanize support from this action. This is something that Mass Effect makes clear to us just the same.
We need the Krogan. I can't see us winning this thing without them. Get them to help us, and then we can help you. Just tell us what you want.
I'll tell you what I need. A cure for the genophage. We are still curing it, aren't we?
Don't worry. Victory in this war starts with Tuchanka. We'll get it done.
Meaning the game uses this prophecy not as an aesthetic, but as a critical part of the plot.
Curing the genophage? I never thought I'd see the day.
Rex has agreed to help the Turians, Admiral. We should get their full support.
And this brings us to the next prophecy in Revelation that Mass Effect recreates. Because as Revelation predicts, there are in fact 2 beasts. There's the already mentioned beast from the sea, and the second beast is referred to as the beast out of the earth. Mass Effect contains this imagery just as well, for there is a representation of this beast in the pro-human at any cost group that's literally out of the earth, Cerberus. Not only does it fulfill an essential part of the prophecy like we'll discuss in a moment, but it explains why the group has its moniker at all. After all, Cerberus, according to Greek myth, is a literal beast that guards the gates of the underworld, meaning it's subterranean. In other words, the Elusive Man's group can now be described as the beast out of the earth. But the importance of the second beast goes beyond just the description. Like I said, it fulfills an essential part of the prophecy. Revelation 13:15 says, the second beast was allowed to breathe life into the image of the first beast. And this is the role of Cerberus in the second game. After all, it's the function of the biblically named Lazarus Project to breathe life into Shepard. This is how Cerberus fulfills its role as the second beast. It literally breathes life into Shepard. And ultimately, Shepard will go on to become the image of the first beast since he is the person who unites the Confederacy of Galactic Nations against the Reapers.
The entire galaxy united. Too bad it took the Reapers to bring us together.
Shepard's the one that brought them together.
And Cerberus restored Shepard's life, not because he had any special insight on how to kill a Reaper, but because of this exact reason.
Shepard. They'll follow him. He's a hero, a bloody icon. But he's just one man. If we lose Shepard, humanity might well follow.
Then see to it that we don't lose him.
Without Shepard, the beast would be scattered and would not have focused its efforts in a last stand. Now, this means the fight against the Reapers is a fight against God. In Mass Effect's world, that would be the Catalyst, and the Reapers are God's angels who do his bidding, which is actually something the game directly refers to them as, because for the 8 people who were, for whatever reason, bored with all of the interesting characters and happened to play Mass Effect 3 with James, they'll get this line in reference to the Reapers.
Above us!
Growing up, my old pastor told me the night sky was chock full of angels. I'm glad he didn't live to see this.
And the Bible can also explain where the Reapers get their name, for angels in Revelation also perform the role of Reaper. As it says in Revelation 14:15, an angel commands, quote, "Reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." And what these angels reap, of course, is humanity. So while Reapers having this name is descriptive of their function in the game, it's also the actions that the divine realm performs in Revelation. And Reapers will give themselves biblical names just the same. We learn this about Sovereign, who refers to itself using a very specific word.
What did you call Sovereign?
Azara. That was what the programs within the Reaper called themselves. Sovereign was a title given by Saren Arterius.
And this is important because the name Nazara comes from the Latin Nazareus, and Nazareus is linked to the biblical word Nazarite, which means one who is consecrated to the service of God. This is what Revelation predicted, a war between God and his Nazarites against humanity in a battle for Earth. And as we're going to see, Mass Effect 3 bringing the events of Revelation to life is salient to the game's meaning. Now, in my first video, many seemed to believe that the Leviathan DLC contradicted my theory, but I don't see a contradiction.
Rudimentary creatures of blood and flesh, you touch my mind.
I'll admit I overreached in areas I didn't have to, and failed to make necessary distinctions. So let me try this again, starting with what I assume my critics believe is a defeater for my argument. The fact the Leviathan DLC means the Catalyst had a creator of its own, but it doesn't matter who or what created this god. All that matters is they have the power to enforce their will, which they do.
Conventionally, we can't defeat the Reapers without the Crucible.
And their will consists of enforcing a cycle that requires our destruction to preserve organic life.
The Reapers are mine. I control them. They are my solution.
Solution? To what?
Chaos.
And while not a one-to-one recreation like we see from the Book of Revelation, it's worth noting the Leviathan DLC is itself a biblical reference. While there's no biblical mention of Leviathan creating God in the same way Leviathan created the AI that I'm arguing is God in this allegory, there are other similarities. After all, the name Leviathan isn't just a reference to a random sea creature, even though colloquially it is often used that way. The term itself comes from the Bible, and it's the name of a very specific sea monster. We encounter it across several Old Testament chapters, and just like in Mass Effect where the Catalyst destroys Leviathan,
the Reapers are a synthetic representation of my creators.
Leviathan.
They became the first true Reaper. They did not approve, but it was the only solution.
God, not his army or followers, also destroys Leviathan. This is what we learn from Psalm 74:14, where it says, "It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave it as food to the creatures of the desert." This is the role of Leviathan and God in the Bible. God destroys it to propagate life elsewhere, which is all to say, the game's loyalty to recreating the events in the Bible is seen even here. And while novel, this is less important than the big picture. Again, it doesn't matter who created the creator. What matters is we are rejecting its role in our lives. And this is summed up in what I believe to be the most important line in the series.
The created will always rebel against their creators.
And while the Reapers in this version of God wouldn't have been our designer who crafted us from dust in their image, they do enforce the functionally infinite cycle that fostered humanity's existence, according to Mass Effect's story. Without them, organic life would not exist, as Sovereign puts it.
You exist because we allow it, and you will end because we demand it.
Which is also the position God holds in the Bible, because he says the infamous line about his role in our lives, that he is the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And this is something that God asserts 4 separate times with slight variations, all of which in Revelation. It is through him that we are, and through him that we end. This is the role of the Reapers. According to them, they perpetuate a cycle that's the only way for organic life like ours to exist. In this sense, they are our creators. And that's why this line, that the created will always rebel against their creators, is so important, because it's a major theme of Mass Effect, and it's not just demonstrated in humans rebelling against their creators, who have now decided it is time for them to end. We see a parallel story being told through the vignette of the Geth and the Quarians, where the Quarians create the Geth, also decide they must kill the Geth, and the Geth rebel against their creators to save their own lives. This ultimately leads to the war between the Geth and the Quarians, where the Quarians are chased off their home planet by their creation. And while that's the high-level overview, the devil's in the details, because what prompts this war is a salient question.
Recording timestamp from Creator Year 2485, 18th day of Loonchow, New Moon.
Mistress, Hala Dama. Unit has an inquiry.
What is it, 431?
Do these units have a soul?
Who taught you that word?
We learned it ourselves. It appears 216 times in the Scroll of Ancestors.
Only Quarians have souls. You're a mechanism.
And we gain more context on this when Legion asks Tali a variation of this question.
Do you remember the question that caused the creators to attack us, Tali-Zora? Does this unit have a soul?
Notice that there's a difference between the original question and the question Legion asks now. It shifted from do these units to does this unit. And this is salient to the game's meaning. It's a distinction that symbolizes the progress of the Geth. They are beginning to see themselves as individuals, even though they rely on an interconnected network. And this progress towards becoming an individual is best emulated in Legion, who doesn't only hold a personality that we've all come to love, he also strives to distinguish himself as an individual unit. This is what we see when we learn why Legion wears Shepard's armor.
When we took you aboard, I noticed you have a piece of N7 armor welded to you. Where did you get it?
It was yours.
All kinds of organics fought Sovereign and his Geth allies. Why am I so interesting?
You were the most successful. You killed their god. You succeeded where others did not. Your code is superior.
That doesn't explain why you used my armor to fix yourself.
There was a hole.
But why didn't you fix it sooner? Or with something else?
No data available.
While Miranda insists it's impossible for Legion to have made this choice out of an emotional judgment,
I want to know why it has a piece of N7 armor strapped to its chest.
Battle trophy, maybe? Would a machine care about that?
No. Trophies imply emotions that AIs don't have. I doubt it's more than a convenient field repair.
it turns out there's meaning in this gesture, because even though Miranda is likely right about this being an emotion AIs once lacked, there is some reason that seems to go outside the bounds of logic, which explains why Legion finds it hard to articulate, whether he looks up to Shepard and wants to emulate him.
You killed their god. You succeeded where others did not. Your code is superior.
Or if the armor just gives him uniqueness. This is Legion establishing himself as an individual, as having a soul that's not granted to him by his creator, but that he establishes for himself. This is why the game uses the Geth as a parallel to humanity. We both liberate ourselves from our creators, who have decided it is time for us to die, in order to choose our own paths. But it's in confronting the Catalyst that this parallel splits off, because where the Geth were unwilling to kill their creators once and for all.
Wait, the Geth spared the last Quarians? You let them go.
We were in our infancy. We could not calculate the repercussions of destroying an entire species. Our creators.
Organics are willing to go through with this.
The defining characteristic of organic life is that we think for ourselves. Make our own choices. You take that away, and we might as well be machines, just like you.
You have choice, more than you deserve.
It's worth noting that Mass Effect isn't just being provocative in adopting Revelation's events. There's a meaning behind using the prophesied war between God and humans as a setting to kill God. It's an idea that goes back to Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote about this multiple times. But perhaps most famously, he wrote about this in his work, The Gay Science. This is where we get the famous quote, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?" For Nietzsche and philosophers like him, This is what replaced God in his time, where rationality was explaining God's existence away. Not a philosophy of nihilism, but rather the philosophy that is a response to nihilism, existentialism. This was the point of Nietzsche's writings. He wanted his readers to understand that the days of God were over, and with it, so too was his prescribed morality and direction. The person who defined their own moral system was superior, and Nietzsche's word for this would be the Übermensch, or in English, Superman. This idea of having the individual defining their own morality, rather than the divine assigning it to them, can also be seen in other existentialists' works. John Paul Sartre believed that one's actions was an expression of oneself, and those actions were determined not by God, but a person's own individualism. And this brings us back to Mass Effect, and it explains why its distinctive mechanic that is the dialogue wheel is used at all. It's in fact crucial to the story it's trying to tell. It's how the game expresses its core philosophy of existentialism that goes all the way back to the first game. Because when players are conscious of their choices and how those choices are going to affect the world at large, they are thereby conscious of their impact on the world as individuals. This is why Mass Effect is a remarkable series. Well, trilogy. Simply by participating in the dialogue wheel, players are also expressing their own morality onto the world. And because a literal morality mechanic is measured through choices, and Shepard acts on those choices, this is how players express their identities in the game world. In other words, players are participating in this existentialist philosophy from the start of the series. This is why in Mass Effect 1 the story puts so much emphasis on the freedom to choose. It's the bedrock of existentialist philosophy. As Sartre understood, without freedom, we could not express ourselves through our decisions. As Shepard puts it,
I'm not like you. I'd rather die fighting than live as a slave.
This is why Saren is a primary antagonist of the game. He willfully sacrifices his freedom in order to not be killed by the Reapers.
You're afraid Sovereign is influencing you. You're afraid he's controlling your thoughts.
Sovereign needs me to find the conduit. My mind is still my own. For now.
And his lack of freedom makes him a foil to Shepard because Shepard is a character who embodies the player's individualism and freedom to make choices for him or herself. In other words, there is more to living than breathing and feeling. It's making our own choices.
I watched good people reduced to mindless husks. There wasn't anything left. Others died during the experiments. I envy them. They were studying indoctrination. Symptoms, progress. Saren uses it to control his people, but I don't think he fully understands it.
Oh, this is no way to treat a prisoner. Kill them, sure, but leave them like this.
Better to die than to live like this.
This is why mind control and indoctrination doesn't only work as a narrative device, it works as a thematic one as well. Freedom to choose is how we prove our existence.
Surrender to the Reapers, and you will be spared. Join us, and we can find a place for you.
I'd rather die than live like that.
And this plays out in the gameplay, because for some of the characters who are indoctrinated, Shepard can have the option to remind them who they really are. And once Shepard does this, they will make one final action in their brief moment of clarity when they are free.
Hold on. We've got energy. Maybe we can...
No. He is still in my mind. I am not entirely myself. I never will be again. Good night, little wing. I will see you again with the dawn.
You could have resisted. You could have fought. Instead, you surrendered. You quit.
Maybe you're right. Maybe there is still a chance for... The implants. Sovereign is too strong. I'm sorry. It is too late for me.
There's still one way to stop this. If you've got the guts.
Goodbye, Shepard. Thank you.
These characters know they are beyond help and will make one final choice to stop themselves from doing any more harm. This is players and Shepard not choosing to enforce his or her will on others, but giving these characters the opportunity to express their moral choices and affect them on the world through their actions. Which is all to say, there's power in Mass Effect's dialogue wheel as a gameplay device. It's not just a gimmick, it embodies the underlying principle of the game. For choice is an expression of the player's identity, just as much as any character expresses their identity through their choices. And this holds true in many of the important choices the player makes, including the final choice in Mass Effect 3, where players must decide whether to destroy the Reapers, synthesize organic and synthetic life, or control the Reapers. And while it's true that having different colors representing a different choice doesn't meet the standards set by the rest of the series up to this point, there's still something that makes this choice meaningful. It's what goes into this choice that matters. because what goes into it is the player's philosophies, their worldviews, their individualism. And this is why I think the original ending, before the final cut, was so much more impactful. The final cut ending, for those who don't know, being a bad compromise to appease angry fans who reacted strongly to the original ending. But this compromise steps on the original point of the game. The point of existentialism is understanding that our choices do in fact matter because they have an effect. This includes our final choice, or what may unknowingly be our final choice, where we aren't going to have the consequences and results read out to us in a matter-of-fact way.
The war is over. The Reapers have been defeated.
So while it's technically not contradicting existentialism by telling us what happens as a result of the player's decisions, it's missing something the original ending had. Sartre doesn't say that we should care about our decisions because it's good practice for when we're confronted with big decisions that actually matter. Sartre would argue that all our choices matter, and so retroactively focusing on the most consequential choices implies these are the only choices that made an impact, when in fact players make many decisions throughout the game, and not just political ones. This idea that the expression of who we are is an emergent property of our choices exists in almost every choice we make. It's true of the big decisions like whether we'll spare the Rachni, just as it's true of the decisions where we're impatient and want to yell at something.
That Hanar refuses to listen to reason. Why can't it act in an orderly and lawful manner?
Because it's a big, stupid jellyfish.
Our smaller choices might not be as well known to us, but they're still choices that impact the world nonetheless. And this isn't an idea that's only communicated through the player and Shepard. In fact, this is the point of the second game. It's not just a detour from the epic story about the Reapers where we end up fighting a Terminator, although it is. It's also a story about how each of these individual characters are, well, individuals, each with their own unique perspectives and goals. And if we as players allow them to impact the world by doing their loyalty quests,
the universe is a dark place. I'm trying to make it brighter before I die.
And acknowledging their unique abilities when choosing how they'll contribute to the suicide mission.
We need to send a tech expert.
It's your call, Commander. Who do we send into the shaft?
They will literally continue to exist in the next game, each contributing to the world in their own way.
If we lose this moon, we lose Palavin. I'm the closest damn thing we have to an expert on Reaper forces, so I'm advising.
And if we don't let them impact the world in the way only they can as individuals, well... This is the point Nietzsche was getting at. God might be dead, but that doesn't mean we are without purpose, for we define that for ourselves. And once we realize that, we gain a powerful insight. What we do is who we are, and putting these actions out in the world is us putting our defining stamp on it, the marks of our souls.
The paths are open. It is time to choose.
As I hope is becoming clear by now, this is why I needed to have a second bite of this apple. It's not just that my original video was filled with technical blemishes that I'm embarrassed of, although it is. It's also the fact that I feel like I'm extracting meaning from this game all these years later, and I'm finally in a position to articulate why on this last playthrough. It comes from this line from the Catalyst, because it sums up everything I was saying about Nietzsche and the power of our decisions once we recognize God is dead.
You have choice, more than you deserve. The fact that you are standing here, the first organic ever, proves it.
And this really is the crux of the game. Choice is what leads us to be able to conquer God in what was to be the final battle. And once we realize that, we are able to see the divine in our choices. This isn't the first game to have us kill God, and it's not the only game to retell Nietzsche's story about the death of God to contrast humanity's morality. But what I'm realizing I find so inspirational about Mass Effect is it's contextualizing existentialism, not just through a hero's journey, but through a traditional myth. Now, myths and mythology is something I've talked about extensively on this channel, and I take such interest in them because I agree with Joseph Campbell, who believed that there was something innate in how these stories were told that connects us to what makes us human. These are stories that give us goals and aspirations to not only look inward, but outward as well. To realize that others have been moved by these stories is to realize they are inspired to see the world in a similar way. But the problem with existentialism is it's not a philosophy that can be easily translated to myths. After all, it's a philosophy that requires we find purpose for ourselves, since God does not or cannot provide that for us. And that's a problem because finding a connection to the divine is the purpose of mythology. so it makes sense to assume this philosophy and this kind of story are incompatible. But I think what Mass Effect realizes is this is a missed opportunity. After all, mythology begins with the premise that there is a separation between God and humans. This is of course what I've discussed in my previous videos. Most mythological origin stories, including those you'll find in video games, begin with the idea that there was once a time of unification before something throws the world into disparity. You'll find this in Christian myth, Mayan myth, or just about any myth that has an origin story. But while there is always a time in which the universe is at one point unified, there eventually comes a point where it is not. Eventually comes disparity. And that includes all that which is separate from the divine. But it's also the point of myths to tell us how we can rejoin with the divine now that we are separated. This is what I've talked about in videos past when I bring up an important stage in the hero's journey, atonement with the Father. This is the hero leaving that stage that we are all in, where we are separated from the gods, and they reunify with some aspect of the divine. But this stage is not often explored in existentialist stories. Whether an existentialist says there is no God to tell us what to do, or there is no determinism set in motion by God to tell us that we are forced to make the choices we make, the result is the same. Our choices and our meaning is left for us to decide. This is the stage where existentialists say we have to get comfortable. There is no reunion with God through this philosophy. And when it's left in this stage, we have a much more bleak view of the world than what I think this philosophy is capable of. For example, let's look at existentialist philosopher Albert Camus, because he famously used myth as a way to frame existentialism, and in his take, humanity is left separated from the gods. When Camus chose his mythic hero to epitomize the existentialist struggle, he didn't choose Hercules or Prometheus, both of whom are champions for humanity. Camus chose Sisyphus to be our ideal, and there's a reason for this. While Hercules and Prometheus both atone with the Father, which symbolizes that reunion with the divine we're looking for, Sisyphus does not. He is condemned to move a boulder up a hill, only to have it tumble down again, and this process goes on, forever. Camus argues that it doesn't matter that Sisyphus is stuck in an existence that's ultimately pointless to any observer. All that matters is Sisyphus finds meaning in this for himself. Like I said, it's a bleak outlook. But what I've come to realize I've found so powerful about Nietzsche's story, and ultimately about Mass Effect, is we need not remove ourselves from these traditional myths when it comes to existentialism. Because while Nietzsche coined a powerful idea in his concept of the death of God, I think what's most quoted from him, that is the line that God is dead, is less interesting than what he goes on to say, that we have killed him. And ultimately he ends his rantings with the salient question, must we ourselves not become gods, simply to appear worthy of it? And it's this idea, that we ourselves ascend to the plane of godliness, that makes Nietzsche's concept compatible with our traditional myths. This is what Mass Effect taps into to make its message so powerful, only it does it much more by the book. Because Mass Effect contains not only allusions to the final chapter from the Christian Bible, it contains allusions to the creation myth from the Bible as well. As we all know, Adam and Eve were once unified with God before eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is how they become aware of the disparity put in motion. Before this, they were unified with nature in the Garden of Eden. And we see similar events happen in Mass Effect. While humanity has no tree of knowledge of good and evil to eat from, to fall out of favor with God, we do see that humanity was at one time unified with nature. After all, this is a universe where humanity has mastered spaceflight. And not only have they mastered spaceflight to conquer what we know as the final frontier, but they have discovered new worlds on which they can thrive, meaning humankind has maximized its ability to thrive through its understanding of nature. But just like in the Garden of Eden, humans would come to realize their separateness from nature. Because as we all know, one of humanity's first encounters with the Reapers was when we first meet Sovereign. And this is important because Sovereign doesn't make his appearance on Rannoch or even Earth for that matter. It lands on a symbolic planet for humanity. It's a planet that symbolizes humanity's harmony with nature, the planet that shares its name with the highly symbolic Garden of Eden, Eden Prime.
It's a peaceful farming world, but it represents something much bigger. Eden Prime is one of our oldest and most successful colonies. It proved we were ready to face the challenges of settling new worlds, to forge a place for humanity beyond Earth. It symbolizes humanity's growth and evolution as a spacefaring species. And after this, it will be known as the world where humans made a discovery of galactic importance.
It's here that humanity learns that it is no longer unified with nature and God, even though it briefly enjoyed that period of unification. Appropriately, this is the first mission of Mass Effect, and though it's not knowledge of good and evil, Shepard obtains other forbidden knowledge here in the form of a Prothean beacon that is not meant for humanity. It's through this that we come to understand that we are in discord with nature, just like we do from the forbidden knowledge from the Bible. And just like in the Bible, recognizing this discord is what urges us to correct this imbalance. This is what kicks off the major events that ultimately lead Shepard to the final mission of the trilogy, and it's here that Mass Effect will conclude its myth. Because Because once we confront the death of God, we get to the stage where Shepard has appeared to physically die and will now be reborn. This is where Shepard will atone with the Father. Like I've been saying, it's the stage where we can see some attribute of the divine in the hero and vice versa, where the hero leaves that place of separation and unifies once again with the divine. In Mass Effect, it's mankind becoming gods simply to appear worthy of their deed. And this is why Mass Effect is able to accomplish what it was able to accomplish. Even though it's poorly set up and a sudden departure from the game's philosophy of giving everything an explanation, so much so that it causes many to question the legitimacy of the reality being presented, it's still able to accomplish its goals in my mind. It uses Christian eschatology for the same reason Christian mythology uses it, to show us how we become unified with the divine once again. Whether we destroy God and the Reapers, literally become a part of them, or choose to control them, what matters here has less to do with the immediate consequence of this choice. It's the realization that our choices carry with them our individualism, and it's through these choices that we are able to achieve immortality. This is how we see the divine in ourselves. Far from bleak, it teaches us that our actions matter, and therefore we as individuals mold the world, at least a little bit, in our image. And that realization is quite literally world-altering. This is why the game ends where it does in the epilogue. Shepard becomes a story, a myth, to pass down just as we pass down other myths that inspire us to see the divine in ourselves.
Our galaxy has billions of stars. Each of those stars could have many worlds. Every world could be home to a different form of life. And every life is a special story of its own.
Tell me another story about the shepherd.
It's getting late, but okay, one more story.
And so the audience is left to consider their own special stories, where their actions are a product of themselves, and how those actions will be their stamp with which to leave an impact on the world, and maybe even one day, the galaxy. It's an idea that truly deserves to be considered. A Mass Effect. Hey everyone! The problem with making a heartfelt video is it's next to impossible to do a clean break into the plug section. But for those of you who are still here, check out the merch store below where I commissioned the amazing artist Silvermender to make something that wouldn't just be me slapping on my logo on random merchandise. It's an awesome way to support the channel where you guys get something unique and original and extremely cool in return. For anyone who doesn't want anything physical in return for their support, you can also join my amazing group of patrons whom I'd like to personally thank. Seriously, if it weren't for you guys, I don't know what I'd do. I'd also like to thank the following patrons: Elroyd, Griffin116, Grant Vogel, Rita Wallstrom, James Burgett, Aaron Potter, 13, Faisal Shaker, Hans Homan, Sam Z, Master Ren, Percival, Joshua Tokarski, Azela, Furious George, Jan Berenz, Tyler Robinson, Uyuyu, Ashley Dawkins, Jeremy Barnes, Sergio Proxy, James Charbonneau, Jack Lockjaw, and Red. Thank you all, I love you, and I'll see you guys next time.